So today we're going to be talking about getting into the trap of building too much. And it's a very common problem, right? It's so easy to just start getting going on a project, on a product, without actually understanding what you're doing yet. You just kind of get into the trap of wanting to please everybody and build stuff. So we want to talk about MVP, which obviously for those that have never heard of it, it's quite a buzzword though, but MVP stands for minimal viable product. And obviously you want to try and build something that will give value to your customers, right? So that's a viable product, right? And so three big elements that we talk about in MVPs is making sure your product is feasible. Can we build it? Is it viable? Is it is it something that's going to make us money, or the project money? Is it viable? And is it desirable? Is it something that people actually want or need? Is it an opportunity worth going into? So, we're going to be laying out that for us today about understanding why we should do MVP. How do we go about it? We're going to talk about some more stories that we've experienced on the panel. So let's do some introductions. So I'm Bobby Sikora, Senior Product Manager at the Delta, and I'll be hosting today's webinar. Really excited to have this conversation. And one of the first things, just before we go, I always felt, and I put it on my LinkedIn post, is, as product managers, we always try and make sure that we're building the right thing. And to do that, you need to have the right people around the table and having the right conversations. And the right people around are your head of development, your head of UX, and a product manager, the three amigos, as some people like to call them. So, which makes me really excited because we're covering our bases today, having those three representations in this call today. So that's me. I'm really excited for it. And I'm going to hand it to ladies first. Monet, if you don't mind just introducing yourself, please.
Annie, thanks so much. Hi, everyone. I'm Monet. I'm the head of UX at the Delta. Super stoked to talk about this topic because this is a mistake that people make often. I've seen it happen multiple times, and I'm glad we get to chat about it and give some tricks and tips from the trade.
Brilliant. Thanks, Monet. Should we pass it on to the Almar, the great Almar? Please introduce yourself.
Thanks, Bobby. Hi, everyone. So my name is Elmar. I am the head of software development, basically responsible for any builds and rollouts of any software that needs to be built through the Delta. I've had about 25 years experience building software in various markets. Have come across this particular problem on many occasions, and it's a challenging one.
It really is. And for those of you that are challenged with understanding your accent,
originally from the Netherlands, but enjoying the South African sunshine, although the last couple of days has been a reminder as to why exactly I left the Netherlands. So I'm hoping for some better weather.
Well, we're glad that we won you over with our weather and obviously the great people, right? Stefan, do you want to go?
Yes, sure. I'm Stefan Grobler. I'm a lead product manager at the Delta. Also super excited. Even put on some cologne for this thing.
Cologne, that's useful.
Jokes, yeah, I'm super excited. 10 years in this industry, specifically this world of building products, and see it week in, week out.
Fantastic. So now that we've laid the field for who we're going to be talking with and on the panel, just a reminder to everyone that's joining, there is a Q&A and there's also a chat. So feel free to chat. If you find there's a topic that resonates with you, you can share it with the other people on the call in the chat, and then questions. There will be a Q&A session at the end for about 10-15 minutes where we will actually make it interactive with everyone on the call. So please stick around and make sure you have your questions ready for us. So to kick us off, the question that we're going to start off with is, why do an MVP? Why should we go MVP? So Stefan, from your point of view, product management, why should someone approach something with an MVP in mind?
That's a great question. I suppose there's many answers to that. A simple practical one would be to mitigate risk, in that the less you know, generally the less you should spend, right? So that makes logical sense. So if there's a problem, you're going after it, and you don't know a lot yet, then don't go build something with the hope of people coming and loving it because you don't yet know. So start small, take your learnings, and follow the data. Yeah, that would be my argument.
Cool. Almar, What's your view? Why should someone, a stakeholder comes to you and you say we should do an MVP? What is the reasoning?
The main reasoning, I think, is that software development is expensive, right? It's a very specific skills. You can see in the market today, the rates of software development and developers in general is quite high. So if you want to go and build something and you don't yet know whether your market is going to accept your product, the argument is you start with something, test the waters, figure out if there's actually a party involved or consumers that want to buy your product, take that knowledge and then improve it.
Yeah, I think you touched on a few things there. I mean, the fact that it's expensive to build. I think, I always talk about it's so easy to have an app idea, right? And then you start like exploring it, and then you want to dive into that build as quickly as possible. But before you know it, you've wiped through a lot of your runway, and it's quite painful. Now you have to tell people and explain what's happened, and you don't really have much to go with. So
and customers are also, they've got so much choice nowadays, right? If you build an app, I mean, you're getting compared to the likes of Uber, Booking.com, like those type of apps are free of charge. They work 100%, but people tend to forget there's like a massive workforce behind that, and they've also had years and years of practice and trial and error to improve those products.
Whenever I think of those kind of stories, I think about my experience at a previous company. We kept talking about like trying to do things, trying experiments. And it was funny when new people joined, they would be like, we should do this. And we're like, yeah, we've tried that. It doesn't work, and that comes with time. And I guess that talks to your point of having, companies that have been in the market that you're against, your competition that's been in the market for a long time that you're up against, to have learned a lot and built and unbuilt things. Moving to Mane, from a UX point of view, I think we can kind of see where you're going to go with this question, but why would you say it's important to do MVP?
Yeah. So I think it's quite easy for founders and product teams to fall in love with their ideas. And what happens then is you lose sight of that core, and you start over engineering and building and on top of this core, and you end up with this massive product that doesn't actually necessarily serve the needs of your customers. It started out with a need, and there's so many nice to haves and things that get added on top of that you end up not doing the one thing that you aimed at doing, or that you started off doing that well. I would definitely say keep your users in mind, keep your customer in mind, and just focus on that core and do that really well before moving on to the next things.
And Mane, something that I've been talking a lot about lately is identifying the difference between a user and a customer. Like, is there anything that you can talk about when you talk about MVP? Because there's also, I'll throw this as a spanner in the works, but there's also the MSP, right, which is the minimal sellable product. So like, how do you approach that kind of sentiment about developing that minimal product, sellable product?
The thing is, you have to look at your users and your customers in a lot of detail. One product doesn't necessarily only have one user or one type of user. You need to segment them, and you have to look at each of those segments individually and in detail, and make sure that you serve those needs, and that you design for each of those segments separately. And then also a famous quote or something to keep in mind is, know that you know thy user and know that you're not thy user. So it's often very tempting to project your own framework and your own experiences and the way that you see things onto your product. But it's really important to know that, that might not be the same for your users. Instead of using the language that feels comfortable, seems familiar to you, use the language that your customers would use and that your users would actually use.
100%. And I just want to put it out to my panelists. Don't wait for me to ask the questions. You guys can turn into a discussion, right?
I was going to say, Bobby, that is so true, right? I mean, the people that have great ideas, those ideas stem from personal experiences that they've had, right? Things that they ran into, challenges and obstacles that they had that they're trying to solve, and they have these brilliant idea on how to solve that specific challenge. And usually what happens is then people start to thinking about it, and then they want to productize it, because now they've got this great idea. They can see that there's probably a market out there with people that have similar interests or are running into similar obstacles, and they kind of think like, oh, but I can now, I could actually build this thing, I can productize this. And then they go and project all of their ideas and all of their vision on this product with the assumption that the market that they're going to target is exactly like a one-to-one copy or a one-to-one replica of the challenge that they run into, right? And what tends to happen, usually that's not the case, right? There's an overlap of things that are specific across the demographic that you're trying to connect with, but normally it's hardly ever 100% fit of what you're trying to build.
And I think, yeah, sorry, Mane. I was just going to say, like, I think the concept of MVP was made famous by the Lean Startup book, right? And one of the big lessons that he talks about in the book is try and get that feedback loop as soon as possible, right? And so that's why we talk about it. We want to get that feedback loop happening as quickly, as soon as possible. Mane?
No, I'm glad, Elmar, that you touched on assumptions, because that is big. It's really big. And it's vital that product teams understand that they go into building a product or into creating this product with assumptions. Like at the very beginning, everything is based on assumptions. And what you want to do is basically validate those assumptions. And by doing that, you will decrease the risk when you end up building. So you kind of want to do that ahead of time before you start building. And
you should also continue to validate those assumptions during your development phase, right? I think one of the biggest things that are holding people back on following this methodology is that they're kind of scared to roll something out that could potentially offend their audience, and then they're kind of scared that they're gonna lose that audience because now they've worked so hard in getting them, and then they roll out this feature, and then the feature is not well received, right? But there's definitely lots of ways that you can avoid that, right? You could do sample sizes, you can roll features out gradually among your users, but the idea is that you measure whether that feature is actually going to solve somebody's problem, is actually going to make them happier, and promote your product more, quicker or more frequent, those type of things.
And I want to say something there, Bobby, if you don't mind.
No, please.
I know I said earlier that we do MVPs because obviously the less you know, the less you spend. I think that's one part of it, but I think there's also this reality that these days you can do a lot of stuff with low code. There's a lot of things assumptions you can test quite fast. So you don't have to go through this experience where you're going to lose everything, like your life savings, and there's this tightrope and you're going to fall off this tightrope. You can get something up quickly. You can go for one pain point. You can build it, launch it, test it, and what then gives you nice maneuverability in terms of changing that, tweaking that, as opposed to having this big platform where you need to make big changes and everything is through the stack or whatever the case might be. So I think cost, yes, but also just the fact that you can move fast and just iterate, just go and change. So I think, a lot of guys come to you and they want this whole complete package, and you say, no, actually, let's just test one assumption, just Webflow that thing, hook up something like database or something like that, and just go for it.
Stefan, I agree, and I think the kind of tools or approaches that you mentioned now, like low code and doing something quick and dirty, I think that actually points back to the original MVP. So like, what can you get away with to actually test your idea and to see how customers would and users would react to that? It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be polished at that stage. You can still get to that. But what you first want to do is test those assumptions and make sure that you have a solid base to refine and to polish.
So touching on that point, Mane, can you give us some sort of, from a UX point of view, what kind of validations do you do? Like, how do you go about knowing, okay, cool, before we just dive into agreeing to build all these things, how do we go through to say, okay, hold on, let's validate some of these things? What are some of the tools or frameworks that you like to use to do that?
So yeah, I think any kind of user research is the right way to go. Like your product will be tested, whether that is before you build or like after you launch. People will test it and they will give you, a reaction to it. So what you want to do is do all of that testing and experimenting ahead of time. So when you are in that process of really ironing out, is this something that'll work? Is it or not? There's a bunch of things that you can do. Traditional user research includes things like having contextual interviews with users, having, creating a quick design prototype. It doesn't have to be engineered. It doesn't have to be linked up. Just that there's a lot of tools that you can use for that as well. Have a quick prototype, test that with users and get their feedback. You can do moderated tests, unmoderated tests. There's a bunch of tools there. But you can also get quite creative in the way that you create these experiments, because that's essentially what you're doing. You are experimenting with a concept or an idea to see if it has some traction, what the reaction is to that, and you can then build on top of that. So, you can create something like a website or a brochure or some kind of I almost want to say like front end, some kind of user-facing element or artifact that can facilitate those conversations so that you can get the reaction from users as if that product already exists and it's as if it's already further down along the line than it actually is. So you're kind of like fast forwarding to that next stage without having to put that time and effort and money into it. Because you can still get great insights from that, and you can go back and refine those, your value proposition and refine your concept. So there's a whole bunch of ways to really get creative and get those results.
Yeah, I've come across a lot of teams, projects, companies that just don't do any of that, which is quite, scary actually, that people aren't doing that kind of stuff. I'm going to move the question to Alma, and I'm going to say from an engineer point of view, your time is not cheap and very valuable. How much do you want to be involved during this time as your engineer, as your head of engineer? How much of your exposure and your team do you want during this early stages of identifying an MVP?
I think before I answer that question, Bob, I actually want to refer back to Marne's answer, right? Because she was talking about feedback, right? And I think a lot of the people that have the great ideas, the ventures, and they want to do things, some of the feedback will be negative, right? It will be like, this is a terrible idea. You should not be doing this. Why are you doing it this way? And the tendency is that people take that feedback and treat it as if it's like a personal attack on them or on their idea. But I think what you should do is analyze the feedback, look at what the trends are between some of the more negative comments, and go and figure out what it is that you can do within your product or within your idea to tweak it and to get something positive out of that, so that you can convert it into something more positive. Because otherwise, if you treat it as something personal, people tend to get stuck, right? And then that's not what we want. Coming back to your question, Bobby, around how much do we want to be involved, right? So engineers is a bit of a specific group of people. They tend to have a bit of a black and white outlook on things, and what we do look at when I start getting involved is more around, okay, so what are some of the technical limitations? Are there already pieces of this big puzzle that are available that we can actually integrate with to save cost and to cut time on development? Can we maybe think of something that you haven't thought of, or like an addition to a bit of software by tweaking some of the rules to make it more accessible, or to leverage more of the platform and expose it in a bigger way that people not necessarily think about? I mean, our work mostly consists about defining the business rules. What is the logic that makes this platform tick? And so we look at any of the ideas from a slightly different angle.
Yeah, you definitely do. And that moves to me asking Stefan, like, you're getting user feedback. Marne and her team are running through getting some user feedback. You're getting some technical understanding of what can be built. where does the product manager come in now? You're the person that needs to kind of play the orchestra and make sure that it's all coming together and all the right things are being done and bringing all the feedback. So just what is your role? How have you managed this process?
Are we working with a founder or are we working with the client?
Well, in general, let's say you've got a client, but in general, we've got here's a brief's been given to us. We want to tap into this market, and we've done some research, we've done some user experience, and we've brought in Elmar to give us some technical background on the product. How do we bring it all together? Like how's your role in all of that?
Yeah, it depends on your style, I think. It depends on your skill set. Product managers generally are from different backgrounds and they have different strengths, etc. I think I'm more from a commercial background and numbers background. So I like cracking business models. So I would like to do revenue forecasts and that type of thing and project forward in terms of the numbers. So I'd ask those types of questions up front, like what is your actual business model? Let's look at your business model canvas, etc. So I'd want to unpack that with the founder and see if the numbers make sense, because obviously you can have a brilliant idea, but if it's like we say a vitamin and not a painkiller, you only have a vitamin, and then you can build it with great intentions, but you won't have the numbers. So it doesn't mean that anything that comes through the pipeline is something you should go and build, even if it's a great idea. If it doesn't have legs, it doesn't have legs. So that's one of the points earlier. You can see when you touch a founder's product, you can see when they're precious about it, they've moved from falling in love with the problem to the product, and now they're precious about their product. Your product should always just be open-handed, and available to tweak. But I would say you would need to start probably. This is the conversation, right? Avoiding the pitfall of building too much. There is a human tendency for people to want to build too much. That's just the bottom line, right? People start with great intentions and they want to, and then they say, yeah, this is MVP, but then they come and they land in the cookie jar and then they want to add more and more and more. And all of a sudden you see it's a platform, it's not an MVP or whatever the case might be. So if this thing could do one thing and one thing well, what is that? Let's define that and let's stick to that. Let's break that down and let's make sure that this one thing that we're aiming at, right? Whatever the case might be, what's that one thing? And I promise you, majority of my time is just bringing them back to that one point, true north. Just, okay, you got lost, bit of AI, bit of Elon Musk tweets, got a bit weird, just come back, okay, you know what I'm saying? And then you do the normal stuff, you build and you do the agile stuff and you take user data and you obviously interpret that. But
I think
making sense of the MVP and then bringing that into production. Production is another chat altogether that should be held at a product conference or something. But that's kind of what I found, yeah.
I think also what happens a lot, right? And how does it happen that we actually build too much? It's about usually when you're trying to sell your product, or when you're trying to get customers on board for like testing and those type of things. So you have the conversations and you want to build this thing and they will say, we love the idea, but right. And then there comes this whole watch list of things that your customer, which you now actually depend on, which you really need to get on board in order to, start the sales pipeline. And they get this watch list of things that they would love to see in this product. And you're having the conversations and you're kind of like, that makes so much sense. We should actually go build this. Right. And then instead of trying to really understand why you can't sell the product with your core idea, because it obviously, it's not good enough, right? There's something that is missing or something that you misinterpreted or that you did not think about that needs to be tweaked. But you need to be very careful of trying to satisfy each and every customer's need, because you're going to end up with a product that's actually not going to be able to service anybody.
Yeah, you can't become everything to everyone, and that is a tendency. And you see that all the time, and the guys get pulled in all sorts of directions. And so, yeah, Bobby, that is bringing people back to true north is part of the job. Yeah.
And your experience with the stakeholders or the founders themselves. I mean, Elmar, you say you've been doing this for 20 odd years. I mean, when you try and hone them in and tell them that, XYZ is not necessary, how do you generally manage their expectations or manage that kind of thing? Because, they're scared to pull the trigger and release, right?
It's a very difficult conversation to have, right? Because developers shouldn't have those conversations because developers want to build stuff, right? That's when they're in their happy place. So you shouldn't tell a developer to stop working on the product because he's gonna fight you on that, right? He loves to make it better. There's always room for improvement. It's a never-ending process. But what I tend to do with my founders and have the conversation with them is like, let's just make sure that we get to a point where you generate money, because what's going to make your product successful, right? There's two things that most of investors are looking for. They're looking at a product that has very valuable data, and they're looking at demographics where the demographic can actually grow significantly, right? Because then they don't mind investing in the product because they can see that there's a potential to 10x whatever you're currently doing. So the first thing is that you need to get those two things right. You need to prove that you can sell the product at a as cost-effective way as possible to develop it, sell it, get the numbers in place, and then you're in a position to actually make some demands. Otherwise, you're going to be completely run over by any investors.
Yeah, so true. Thanks for that. Mande, from a UX point of view, a lot of the time I've spoken to UX, they like to see the bigger picture, because the bigger picture kind of helps them see the vision of the project, right? Or the product and what it's going to be able to do. And the vision's normally that big, but to build that big is huge. So can you just explain that thinking of, I see this, how do I bring it down to that MVP? Like what's your process there? What's your thinking on,
Yeah, that's a good question. I think as a designer, it's really important to understand that bigger picture, because what you do now, even though you're not building and designing that whole ecosystem or platform or whatever it is, you want to future-proof what you're doing now to fit into that bigger picture. Because otherwise what ends up happening is you have these different parts that eventually slot in with one another, and you end up with this Frankenstein product that is so disjointed and tricky to navigate. So it's important to know where you're heading, even though you're only focusing on like a small bit at this stage. And then to answer your question on like what to focus on, I think it's important to take all of the features and all of the possibilities into consideration, but then test them against like actual users. Like your users will tell you what they want and what they need. And you might have another idea, but if you focus on the facts and the findings that you get from user research, that is going to guide you. So focus on, things that come up often, things that are really urgent, really critical. Like Stefan mentioned, those painkillers. You don't want to start off with vitamins and nice to have. You want to really focus on the things that would make a difference and that's going to solve real problems. And if you do user research, like your users will tell you what it is that you need to focus on, and you need to be open to receive that and to really extract the correct information, because you can also go about it in a wrong way where you skew those results, or maybe you're a little bit biased. Maybe, like Elmar mentioned, you already fell in love with this idea and you're now so focused on the solution that you're not focused on the why anymore. And that can kind of mess around with things. And whenever someone is like very precious about an idea, what I found is that they just spend a lot of time and effort on that idea at that point. So you want to, you don't really want to get to that point. You want to start testing and things before that point, so that if there's something wrong, which there often is, you can learn and you can either pivot or persevere if you see that is the right thing, or you can kill that idea. And that's also something that we have to, it's a risk that you run in finding out the truth. Maybe the truth is that it is a bad idea and that people won't, use it, they won't like it. And you have to go into testing and into it with just knowing that it might not work. And yeah, just be open to receiving that true feedback.
Elmar, I'm just thinking now, like, what is the danger of someone putting together a type form and an Airtable slap that as your MVP, kind of just get like people coming in and giving you some of their, feedback or whatever it is. What is the technical danger of doing that? Like down the line when Monet talks about future-proofing yourself?
So actually in the beginning, there's not a danger at all. I would say, if you shoestring a solution together just to prove that the concept works and that your customers are happy and that you can actually sell this thing and that there's a market that is interested in that solution, even though it doesn't have all the bells and whistles and it is very basic, there's actually no harm in that. There's actually value in that, because basically it means that at the point where you think, okay, now I want to scale this, I don't want to service 5 people with this particular solution, I actually want to go and build this for 1,000 people, right? That's sort of like at the scale point where you need to think about, okay, now I can't do this for 1,000 people. If I need to do this for 1,000 people, it's going to take me, it's like, an 80-hour week in order to be able to maintain this, right? And that's where we can take some of that responsibility and maintainability off your hands by providing you streamlined interfaces, predefined business rules that will prevent mistakes, that will allow you to still be able to control a lot of that functionality that you originally designed, but then streamline the delivery method and optimize all of the business logic on that side.
Brilliant. I see there's some questions coming through, which is great, guys. Just a reminder, please put those questions there. We're going to have Q&A starting very soon, so get those questions in. Stefan, you have some war stories for us. I think it's quite interesting. We've spoken about like all these things that we've faced with, but it's always nice to put into context for a story that's actually happened, something we've experienced where we've learned these lessons. Do you want to share one of your stories with us?
Sure, yeah. I think we all have war stories, especially Elmar. I mean, he's been going at this for 20 years and you too. So we all have war stories. I'll tell you, in light of the conversation we're having about this pitfall, I think one of the greatest, I'm talking about the temptation, right? The human thing. I'm not talking tech or product. I'm talking like the psychology behind this little, put more stuff in. And I was working on an incubation program for a big corporate, and we had amazing budget, and we got like these people to apply to solve social issues in South Africa, and I was loving it. I was the program manager, and so we had these amazing ideas come in, and there was a kid from Soweto, a 22-year-old guy who came in with this amazing idea of building a LinkedIn for soccer, essentially, whereby which you, so soccer scouts in Europe or in South Africa are looking for soccer players for their academies, right? Left back with a left foot that's 1 meters tall, and all these, they have these specific things. And so he came up with this radical idea, we're gonna put these African kids, are gonna put them on this platform, and mom and dad's going to make videos, or friends are going to make videos, and however which way you're going to solve the content problem, but you can build this platform. And we went to agents. They were keen. Agents were like, in South Africa, they're like, they need to drive everywhere, they don't have footage, they need to go to every Saturday to a match, and it's a mess. And I was working with this 22-year-old founder, and we chatted to the soccer magazine in South Africa at the time. I don't know what the big magazine's name is anymore. Anyways, we chatted to the editor. No, it was another one. Neil Gregg was the editor at the time, and the scouts and everyone is keen. And this 22-year-old guy, we're like sitting there, we're like, dude, this is epic. We're gonna build this thing. We've got budget, 2-bar, 3-bar, let's roll. And he said he wants to do AI, and we said, what? He said he wants drones in the sky, and he wants to take footage via drones of these kids and upload that. And he held on to that, bro. And we didn't launch that thing. And he held on. We had to fight with him. And at the end of the day, he said, you know what? It's drones or nothing.
Really?
And, I promise you, dude. And I've seen this where people, they fall in love with the tech, they fall in love with the product. And you're like, dude, this is validated, done the tests, we built some low code stuff, and fell away, lost contact with him. And I mean, like, you just imagine, like, sometimes I just think, like, what if he did launch that thing? And like, I
can tell you now, I mean, in my past life I was a soccer coach, and I can definitely see a value for that, for sure.
Yeah,
like,
I mean,
there was some talent that I came across, and I knew that their opportunities were going to be slim because of problems like this. So Wow, that is a war story.
Yeah, so there's this notion when you work with founders where you walk a road with them in product management and you help them. And some guys just they hold on to that thing so tightly, and some guys just don't come through. And so I've seen other stories. We were in a web development agency. We're a small agency. We're scraping by, selling hours, building little WordPress websites for a big corporate, and big telco approached us, and the telco said, "Do you guys do mobile media entertainment?" And the founder said, "Yes, we do." And we don't. They ended up building a platform for mobile media entertainment that they could white label, and that platform gets integrated into the telcos across Africa. So many of these soccer SMSs that you see in South Africa and north of South Africa is sent through that machine that was built by a little web development agency that was scraping by building WordPress sites, just pivoting, just realizing there's something here, let's do it. So I've seen people who are agile, who are tenacious, who can take risks. There's more stories. I mean, I've got many stories. There was another. I'll tell one last one. There was an African kid where I was working with him. He was matching people applying for bursaries, and they get NSFAS bursaries, funding rather. They get funding. And then the application process is a nightmare, as anything in South Africa. And so we validated this, and he built this slick application process, and it was very nice and neat. And he just couldn't drive this thing. And because he needed support and whatever, he decided to go work for his uncle again. But we were like almost there, and he just decided to tap out, and somebody else took that, and they first in the market, and now they're rolling. And they even copied the name. To be honest with you.
Wow. That's painful. That's painful.
So
yeah, Mane, Elmar, do you have a war story worth telling before we dive into some of these questions they're starting to line up here?
And actually completely unpracticed, but it's also about the soccer project. So maybe we should have a chat, Stefan, afterwards. So this was one of the projects that I was involved with, was to create a match notation system for soccer players. And the idea was, this was a while back, but the idea was, you take a tablet, and instead of displaying a keyboard on the tablet with letters, you basically display soccer moves, and you label the players, and you literally tab while the match is happening. You tab on the screen to say, okay, it was a pass or an assist from player 10 to player 8, and the goal was successful, right? And you basically create this story, this narrative around the match. And then what we did, because we had access to the camera feeds within the stadium, we could then, like during halftime, the coach could literally press play button and say, okay, list me all of the successful assists or all of the failed defense, and then they could have like a little quick check-in, say, hey, okay, so what needs to happen if this happens again, the situation is similar to right, instead of going left, you should go right, or you should go in order to give these little quick tips with visuals, right? So that was the whole idea. And then idea was perfect, right? And then before we started to sell, basically what happens is like, oh, but we should actually, if people get an injury, now that we've got all of the notation and we know exactly where in the field it injured, we can even review and play back the exact circumstance. We should actually go and chat to the medical staff, because they will be interested in this, right? So then we chat to the medical staff. Now a whole medical module needed to be developed and added onto this thing, because this was now critical. Before we finished the medical thing, I was like, oh, but hold on. Actually, talent acquisition is also a good idea, because I mean, these players are valuable. We should actually go and have a look, because there's a recruitment process and there's a scouting process, and we should actually add this into this program as well, right? And then before we finished that, it was like the next thing, right? So we ended up probably spending, I think, through 3 years, more or less, building and bolting all these features on. Then we finally got it deployed, and we had it running at Amsterdam Ajax and FC Barcelona in Spain. So two very reputable professional soccer clubs. And then afterwards, it was like, okay, but now we need to sell it to others, right? Because the world is out there. There are so many soccer clubs out there, professional and on amateur level. And actually what we realized, we couldn't sell the product because none of the other soccer clubs were interested in that specific combination and this massive thing. They wanted one specific module. They wanted the match notation, but they had no interest in the medical because there was already something else in. And then we decided, it had to be unbolted. And we started off from scratch, right? And by that time, company ran out of funding and it was a mess.
Yeah. You touched on quite a few things there. Shifting goalposts. So excuse the pun, but or the analogy, but like literally devs always shouted at the product managers, whatever, they keep shifting the goalposts. So you're trying to hone in on this one problem and then, they get this new information and then the goal shifts post move. And it just keeps going. So like, how do you say, stop shifting it? We need to get this out and we need to start getting feedback. So yeah, some great stories there, but I think let's dive in. It's now 15 minutes to go. So I definitely want to dive into the questions. So first one came from Mark van der Berg, depending on which side of the curtain you're from. Let's talk MVP with A/B testing. How would you frame the options to learn? And where do you share these experiences across understanding these iterations? So Mane, I'm assuming you're the best person to answer.
Cool. Okay. So how would you frame the options to learn and where do you share these experiences across understanding these iterations? It's interesting. It's definitely an interesting question. Some people are very much for A/B testing and other people very much against it. And I guess it depends on what your research objectives or what your objectives is for that test. With usability testing, I found that A/B testing is great because you want to see do people navigate this way or do they do it that way? It's a very easy way and it's a very easy way to tally that. Whereas with something else where you're still trying to grasp the concept and validating that concept, it's a little bit more difficult unless you do this in a moderated way. Because with moderated A/B testing, you can really understand the why behind that. And you can also show the same person both versions or multiple versions.
When you say moderate, you mean being there, watching them do it and kind of watching how they go about it. Okay.
Yes. So there would typically be a facilitator present and that person would guide the participant through a process in a very light touch, calculated way so that they don't interfere with the findings and that they don't skew those results. And then you have the opportunity to ask why. So if someone chooses A instead of B, you can ask why. You can understand that reasoning behind it, and that helps to inform a bunch of decisions. Whereas if you do it, because there's a lot of tools that you can use to do A/B testing with, and if you use those tools, you don't have the opportunity necessarily to ask why and to get that deeper understanding. And I'm a big fan of that deeper understanding, just because it does paint a picture and it just enables the entire product team to make informed decisions.
Definitely. Funny enough, today in a meeting, it's not really a product, but it was more of the marketing growth side of a product within the Delta, and they were doing some social media campaigns where they had pink and black different campaigns that were happening at the same time, and they saw that the pink one had a lot less traction, so they used the exact same copy and everything, changed the color to black, and all of a sudden they got more hits on it, and boom. I mean, it's amazing that even a color can actually change the success of something.
Yeah, I mean, you can test a whole bunch of things. You can test the positioning of your value proposition, which is really important to test. You can test a whole bunch of things in that way, just to see what resonates better and what gives you more traction.
Yeah, even delivery mechanisms, right? depending on your audience, like whether you should go more like a low-code style where you send SMSs, which is more adaptable for maybe your demographics if you're targeting a certain demographics, versus fancy-looking emails, versus sending emails that are more specific to, more geared towards use on mobile phone or friendlier on mobile phone. So there's loads of ways that we can technically also manipulate some of those testing elements.
Yeah.
Cool. So the next question came from Kaya, and he said, Stefan spoke earlier on leveraging one of the many low to no code options out there to execute on an MVP. When is it a good idea not to use low code or no code tools for an MVP? Are there metrics, signals determine when it's a good idea or a bad idea? Anyone want to take that, Stefan?
I think
I can answer.
Go for it, Elmar, if you want. Go.
Yeah, so obviously one of the biggest benefits of using a low-code and no-code platform is speed, right? It's the ability to very quickly create a basic working application or framework that solves your problem using well-defined patterns and well-defined looking interfaces. One of the downsides of that is that for many of the low-code, no-code platforms out there, you're getting sort of like stuck into a one-size-fits-all, sort of like mechanism. Your UI, your interface, your business processes are going to be very similar to the next person that built something on the low-code, no-code platform. So if you're looking for a advantage or like an edge to your competition, if there are competitors out there that offer similar services, or you're trying to play on that, being able to create a brand identity and make yourself stand out above the rest, then probably a low-code, no-code is going to be challenging, right? We can do quite a bit with some of the tweaking, but you're always going to be stuck in this sort of like very predictable, very standardized pattern. But yeah, as I said, advantage is you're gonna have a reduced cost.
Yeah, and I think in the early stages that resonates with a lot of founders.
Just want to add to that quickly. I just want to say the job picks the tool, not the other way around. So you look at the problem you're trying to solve and you see how little can you get away with. There's a lot of automation stuff that you don't need at the beginning. So there's lots of stuff you can do manually on your own, scrape by, that type of thing. So you don't need all the bells and whistles of a big back end or all of that stuff. So it really comes down to wanting to solve the problem and then conceptualizing the solution. And in conceptualizing the solution, there you will find what's the best tool for the job. More often than not, if you're going for one pain point, you want to test to see if there's traction, then a low code can be a nice to send into the market.
And maybe just the last on that one as well, right? So one of the biggest challenges or what usually tends to happen is, right, that you've got this idea and you basically want to target, your audience is millions, right? It's out there, it's a brilliant idea, and you tend to build for the fact that you're gonna end up with millions of customers. You streamline all of the processes. You're going to go there, that everything will be, if it's millions of customers, everything is going to be work. So you want to automate as much as possible to prevent mistakes going further down the line. In practice, getting to millions of customers is hard work. It doesn't happen overnight, right? So you need to just take the position that you can probably build something that is suitable for 100 customers. Yes, you're going to have some admin. Yes, you will probably make some mistakes along the way. It's absolutely fine, right? Once you get to like 1,000 customers, you've got enough learnings. You can start tweaking and looking at the things that are actually costing you money, or where you're spending a lot of time, so that you can like take that piece out and automate that part. So it's about taking these steps, setting well-defined boundaries. Once you get to the boundaries, specify the next set of steps.
I like that. Sure, that was great, guys. Thank you. Moving to the next question from Aniska. Marne, how much effort time would you say is sufficient to invest from a UX point of view on an MVP? Oof.
Good question. So I would, from a UX perspective, I would divide UX into two parts, right? So you have user research and you have UX design. So like information architecture, wireframing, all of that, and everything else would be research. For MVP, I would focus less on the design part, and it hurts me a little bit to say that, but I would sacrifice a little bit on that part, unless it interferes with your concept or the user actually being able to complete the task. And if there's a lot of friction and stuff, then definitely look at that. But you don't have to craft it to the T for MVP. You have the ability and the opportunity afterwards to polish the right things. Where I would spend a lot of effort, or the majority of my effort and time before an MVP, is on the research part of it, because you want to make sure that what you are building is correct, and not necessarily how you are building it from a UX perspective. So usability and those things, there's best practices and all of that you can utilize, but you can keep that a little bit on the lowdown, and then really focus your time and effort on research, validating, making sure that the concept is solid and what you put out there is solid in terms of the need that it solves.
I think from a UX point of view, when you talk about build, measure, learn, you guys are like emphasizing we want to learn.
Yes.
That how can we learn? How quickly can we start learning, and not spending too much time on high fidelity, right?
I think the one thing that people do then must keep in mind is, right, that customers are spoiled for choice, right? And everything looks very slick. So in order to learn, you must be able to sell the product, right? You must have an ability to onboard consumers onto your product or your platform or whatever it is that you're building, right? The biggest detractor from people onboarding is usually, the first thing that they see is the look and feel of the product, right? So it's trying to strike that balance, and that's a really hard one, right? We've got lots of best practices out there. We work off a lot of blueprints where we have, that we can style and tweak, and to actually make sure that your product looks, the best what it can be, given the time constraints. But it's a very fine balance to find.
Agree. So like having a polished, especially when we talk about UI, having a polished product definitely builds trust, and it kind of creates this expectation that everything will be working fine because it looks polished and it's nice. But what I've seen is, so you have that on the one end, but on the other end you have something that is functionally super sound. It really solves problems, and maybe it's not that pretty, maybe it's a little bit questionable, but if you taste that and you roll out with that, people keep on using it because of the problem that it solves and because of that pain. So if I had to choose between, I would lean towards that one as well.
I think also if you go back and you go on Google and you Google, for example, a screenshot of Facebook, right? And you go back in time and you see what Facebook looked like when it was initially launched, and you see what it looks like now, right? Those things don't happen overnight, right? It's more on trying to get your customers on board.
I also agree. I go with function every day of the year. Function, the UI stuff, because the guys want to get pulled into branding and logo designs and styling emails for days. You're like,
Later, you do all of that.
There must be a key golden thread. Pull that thing right through to the checkpoint. So they came, they saw, they paid. God bless. Wait a minute.
I like that.
And there's a shortcut or a quick and easy way to do that as well. Just apply dummy placeholder branding and UI, and you're good to go. You can always revisit it later and make it super solid. But it's not the most important thing to start off with.
All right, guys, as we've I think that's going to be the line of the day. They came, they saw, they paid. Love it. I think we've got time for one more question before we tie up. The question is, how do you engage potential customers with MVP to get feedback while protecting your product idea? I love that question. Anyone want to take that?
I can answer about that one. All right. So that's going to be difficult. And that's the truth, right? It's really, if you want to do, if you really want to protect the idea, the only way to do that is to get people to sign NDAs. And that's then the legal constraint, but that still doesn't protect you from that idea spreading. Because I mean, you can put it in paper, but proving that people have actually spread that idea is a different story, right? So you can take measures in you can try it that route. At the end of the day, it's going to be really hard to prove, and it's going to, even if you do go into a legal court case to get that out, it's it's still very difficult, first of all, to prove how much money you lost or how much income you lost out because somebody was leaking the idea, and even to put a price tag on that, like how much was your idea worth. The other thing is that if you you're going to get that product is going to get out, right? At some point it's going to be released. People are going to look at it. They're going to download it from an app store. They're going to go to a website. You're putting all your marketing efforts in there. Your competitors or people that think that is a brilliant idea, assume that if your idea is good, it's going to get copied. I know of companies in and around the world, the only thing that they do is monitor new apps on the app store, and they do that daily. And the one that they think like, ooh, that could be something, they literally replicate and copy that whole idea, and they're going to go and run with it. The objective is you need to be the first one to get the market share. If you have the market share, it's going to be that much harder for a competitor to get into that market.
I think it's also a mind shift change that you have to have. Like, you have to get used to, an idea is only as good as its implementation, right? So you got to get the word out there, otherwise it'll never be successful. So if you hold it close to your chest, people aren't going to find out about it. You're not going to get adoption, and products are successful when you get network effects. So I've become more comfortable talking about these ideas, because that's when you start getting that feedback. If you keep it to yourself, you're not going to be learning from everyone. I do understand you want to keep that product idea, secure, and you want to kind of be the one that holds it, but there's a point where you have to be a little bit more confident with it and say, well, it's about the implementation, so let me focus on that rather than the idea itself. Guys, we've run out of time and we've still got lots of questions, so I'll speak to our powers that be that we can still figure out a way to engage. Please, guys, if you want to contact us, you can contact us with the questions, or any of us on LinkedIn. Well, besides Stefan's an anomaly on social media. But please feel to reach out to us. We can answer your questions, and we'll save these questions also and see if we can get it out to everyone. Please reach out, info@thedelta.io, if you want to get hold of us and pop us that question, or if you want to get hold of us in any other way. I'm going to take the time to thank my panel, Elmar, Marne, and Stefan. Thank you very much for sharing your expertise. It's a great thing, and you can see we could probably carry on, but I'm sure people are hungry. So thank you very much.
And thank you, Bobby, for hosting.
Absolute pleasure. Guys, thank you so much. We would do the final takeaways, but I think we ran out of time. So with that, we'll call it a night. Guys, thank you everyone for joining us, taking your time out and joining us here on the webinar. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.